Sandra Bullock adjusted her sunglasses as she stepped into the exclusive first-class lounge at LAX. The soft lighting, leather seats, and hushed conversations gave the space a sense of quiet luxury. She walked over to a vacant seat in the corner and placed her designer bag down. Despite her wealth and fame, she never carried herself like a celebrity. She had just taken out her phone when she heard a voice, loud and dripping with arrogance. "Oh my God, seriously? You're letting just anyone in here now?" Sandra looked up and saw a woman in a fitted, diamond-encrusted dress standing near the entrance. Her manicured fingers clutched a gold-plated purse, and her eyes, hidden behind oversized sunglasses, scanned the room with open disgust. Sandra ignored it at first, but then the woman's voice grew louder. "I mean, I paid for exclusivity. I don't expect to share my space with—" She gestured vaguely in Sandra's direction, her nose wrinkling as if she had just smelled something unpleasant. Sandra kept her composure. Years in Hollywood had taught her that dignity was more powerful than words. But the woman wasn't done. "People need to know their place," she muttered, flopping down in the seat directly across from Sandra. She took off her sunglasses, revealing sharp, judgmental eyes. "Honestly, some folks just buy their way into first class without belonging here." Sandra felt a prickle of annoyance but remained silent. However, other passengers in the lounge had begun to take notice. Some glanced at Sandra, recognizing her instantly. Others exchanged awkward looks, unsure whether to intervene. Then, from the corner of her eye, Sandra noticed a man, tall, dressed in a laid-back hoodie and sneakers, leaning against the bar. He had been watching the entire exchange with a smirk. Snoop Dogg. His presence was casual, but his expression said everything. He had seen enough. Without a word, he picked up his drink and walked towards them. "Yo," he said smoothly, sliding into the seat next to Sandra. He took off his sunglasses, revealing sharp, knowing eyes. He didn't need to introduce himself. Everyone knew who he was. The rich woman blinked, momentarily thrown off by the sudden interruption. Hello?" Snoop leaned back in his seat, his presence effortlessly commanding. He turned to Sandra, completely ignoring the woman's attitude. "You good, Sandra?" he asked, his voice calm but pointed. Sandra smiled. "I'm fine, Snoop." He nodded, then finally shifted his attention to the woman. "You good?" She hesitated. "Well, You real concerned about who belongs here, huh?" he interrupted smoothly. He took a sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving hers. "That's interesting. Real interesting." The woman shifted uncomfortably. "I just meant—" "Nah," Snoop said, cutting her off again, this time with a lazy but unmistakably serious tone. "I get it. You one of them people that think money means better." He shook his head. "That's funny. Real funny. 'Cause last time I checked, class ain't about how much you spend. It's about how you treat people." Sandra watched the woman's face. A flicker of uncertainty crossed it. People were listening now. But Snoop wasn't finished. "Tell me something," he said, leaning forward. "How much you got in that purse right there?" The woman blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." He gestured at her gold purse. "How much cash you got in there right now?" The woman scoffed. "I don't carry cash." Snoop chuckled, shaking his head. "That's what I thought." He leaned back, looking at Sandra. "Ain't it wild how some folks walk around thinking they better than everybody, and they don't even got $1 on them?" The entire lounge fell into stunned silence. Sandra couldn't help it. She smiled. "Before we continue the story, let us know where you're watching from." The woman's face turned red. She clenched her purse, lips pressing together in frustration. "I don't see how that's relevant," she muttered, glancing around as if expecting someone to back her up. But nobody did. Snoop Dogg smirked. "Oh, it's very relevant." He took another sip of his drink, letting the moment stretch out. "See, you was real loud a minute ago talking about who belongs where. But turns out, you ain't even got $1 to your name right now. Meanwhile, my friend Sandra here, who you just tried to shade, She's one of the most generous people in Hollywood." The woman blinked, caught off guard. Sandra raised an eyebrow, but she let Snoop continue. "You ever heard about what she did for them hurricane victims?" he asked. He didn't wait for a response. "Sandra ain't out here flexing her money, but she donated millions to people who lost everything. She ain't bragging about it, she just did it." The woman looked uncomfortable now, shifting in her seat. "And you sitting here acting like you better?" Snoop let out a laugh, shaking his head. "That's crazy. Crazy how the loudest one's always the weakest ones." The woman's mouth opened, but no words came out. Sandra finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "You know, kindness doesn't cost anything. But arrogance? That comes with a price." A murmur ran through the lounge. People were paying attention now. Some even nodded in agreement. Snoop leaned forward again, placing his drink on the table. "Tell you what," he said, pulling out his wallet. He flipped through the cash and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He held it between two fingers and slid it across the table towards the woman. "Here," he said, "since you're so worried about who belongs here, go ahead and buy yourself some class." The silence was deafening. The woman's eyes darted between the bill and Snoop's face. Her fingers twitched as if she wanted to snatch it, but her pride held her back. She swallowed hard, stood up abruptly, and stormed out of the lounge without another word. As soon as she left, someone chuckled, then another person, and then the whole lounge erupted into quiet laughter and murmured applause. Sandra sighed, shaking her head. "You really didn't have to do that, Snoop." Snoop grinned, leaning back. "Nah, I did." He picked up the $100 bill and slid it back into his wallet. "Besides, I knew she wasn't going to take it. Folks like that, too proud to accept help, too empty to give it." Sandra smiled. "Well, I appreciate you stepping in." Snoop shrugged. "Always. Real ones gotta stick together." Before we continue, if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another special story for you. The tension in the lounge settled, replaced by a quiet sense of satisfaction. People whispered among themselves, a few shaking their heads at the arrogance they had just witnessed. But one thing was clear. Sandra and Snoop had just delivered a lesson no one in that room would forget. Sandra leaned back in her seat, finally allowing herself to relax. "You know," she said, glancing at Snoop, "I've dealt with a lot of people like her in this industry. It never gets old." Snoop chuckled. "Oh, I know you have. But see, the difference is you stay classy. You let them dig their own hole." He took another sip of his drink. "Me? I like to hand them the shovel." Sandra laughed, shaking her head. "You really know how to make a point." Just then, an older man dressed in a well-tailored suit approached their table hesitantly. He had been sitting a few seats away the entire time, watching everything unfold. "Excuse me," he said, clearing his throat. "I just wanted to say that was probably one of the most satisfying things I've ever witnessed." Sandra smiled. "Well, I'm glad someone appreciated it." The man nodded. "That woman, Margaret, she's been coming to this lounge for years, and she treats people terribly every time. The staff here despise her, but they can't do anything because of how much money she spends." He shook his head. "But what you two did, you gave her something money can't buy, a reality check." Snoop smirked. "Oh, she gon' remember that one." The man chuckled. "I bet she will." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "By the way, I'm the regional manager for this airline. And I just want to say, anytime either of you fly with us, your lounge access is on the house. Permanently." Sandra's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Oh, that's very kind of you, but..." The man held up a hand. "No, really, you've done more for the people who work here today than you realize. Consider it a small token of appreciation." Snoop grinned. "Aye, free lounge access? I'll take it." Sandra chuckled. "Well, I guess I can't say no then." The man nodded and walked away, leaving Sandra and Snoop exchanging amused looks. Snoop leaned in. "So, what you think? We keepin' this tradition? Whenever we fly, just waiting for the next person to get humbled?" Sandra laughed. I have a feeling we won't have to wait long." As they sat back, the lounge returned to normal. Conversations picked up again, but there was a different energy now, a reminder that respect mattered more than money, that kindness still carried weight. And somewhere beyond the glass doors of the lounge, a woman in a diamond-studded dress was probably fuming. But she had learned something that day, or at least she would. And for everyone else in that lounge, there was one undeniable truth. Class isn't about what's in your wallet, it's about what's in your heart.